Well, here we are again. So I hope you had time to do your planning sheet correctly. I hope you're sitting comfortably and we'll make a start. So I'm just going to put the horizon in a minute, but it's actually a good idea to get your mount and just see how much of the paper is going to be actually chopped off by your mount. And that, then you're not going to put any important information too close to the edge. So I am going to just do a very, very simple horizon, but remember we said about not having it halfway and having it a little bit higher up, so more on a third. Okay, so I'm just going to split and put some little marks here. And actually, I think I might even just draw this with a ruler, just so that I know I've got a really straight line. Really, really pale, so that only you can see that line. Just make it a wee bit longer. And then I'm just thinking about, splitting that as well, thinking about what we said about thirds, and the sun will go about there. I'm not going to draw it, but it will go about there. Now, I'm just going to use this old photocopy here and just sort of reliven my colours, because I can see that they have just dried up a little bit, which is fine. All we need to do is just add a little bit more water, and just to check them again, this won't take long. I'm just going to put one blob of water in each colour. And then just give them a mix. Start with your lightest colour. And then if you can put your hand on your little tester, you can just test it. Yeah, that looks pretty much the same. Then wash your brush well, dry your brush, remember that. Don't want to add any more water. That looks okay. And then I think I'll do the blues. So if some of the timing on this video is a little bit weird, I do apologise if it's doing some weird things, but hopefully you get the idea. And you're just adding a bit of water. Now this one, I'm going to have to add a little bit more than one blob. Okay, and then just test it. Actually, it's a bit weak, so I'm going to pinch a bit of that darker colour again. Try it again. That's better. And this is a little bit too thick now. Oh, actually, it's not too bad. And you can see I scrape my brush because quite a lot of the paint sits in the bristles, so don't waste any. And do that with all your colours. Blob in each. Test it. It's okay. And the same again. So we're going to do the sky, starting with the yellow, I think. Now the first thing we need to do is to wet the paper thoroughly. Now I just still use my size 12 brush, but if you have a bigger one, you can do that. Wet it thoroughly, and remember we're wetting it below the horizon line, over the rocks, don't worry about that, but bring it further down than the line where the sea meets the sky, by about a centimetre, a couple of centimetres. Put plenty on, because the idea is that your paint wants to run, so if it's just a bit damp, that's not going to work. So put plenty of water on, takes a bit of time, and then just give it a run to make sure you've got any dribbles. Get rid of your dribbles. You don't want it to be, you know, like rivulets. Just take off a few dribbles. And then, like we did on our little one, start with the yellow. Think about where you want your sun. That might be a bit high. Thinking about where my mount's going to be. So I'll bring it down. Now this white patch, I guarantee, will disappear at some point. Because our colours are all non-staining, we'll be able to lift it back and get the white back later. I'm just taking that little bit of yellow off and just softening this a wee bit before I put the orangey colour on. And yeah, the speed is doing some weird things on this video, so I do apologise. But just put the colour where you see it. Your eyes should be flicking backwards and forwards to your photographic reference. You can always take bits off if it's too strong. And then give that a little bit of a run from side to side before we put the blue. Now you can see that the white patch of the sun has disappeared. I knew it would do that. So now you can just put a bit more water there. Yeah, you can start to put your blue on. You can leave some white patches in places if you think you want plenty of clouds. It's your picture. And it looks quite weird at this stage, but you've got to have faith that it's going to be okay. Just keep putting little bits where you see it. And I'll put the cerulean on at the bottom. It's fine if you go over where the rocks are supposed to be, that's okay. And it's fine if it crosses the yellow, but just be a little bit careful where it crosses the orange and yellow, because you can get green. So I've just put a touch on the left. I'm not going mad with that. And then give it a tip again. And let all those colours sort of run together. And then with a grey, just put in a few darker areas as though the clouds have got like a shadow underneath them. Don't go mad with this. And actually, if you've got a sky that you actually think, I quite like it as it is, then if you like it as it is, then don't do any more. Not at any point should you do exactly what I do. If you think I like it just as it is, then leave it and don't do every stage that I'm doing. That's absolutely fine. Sometimes I overdo it, and I'm the first one to admit that. I'm going to give that another little run and let them just soften. And now I'm just going to take out this sun with a damp brush, because as we said before, our colours are non-staining and it's easy to do that. I'm going to add a little bit of salt. Just remember whereabouts we're putting it. You know, it's in this area here, so you've got to think, well, where are my rocks going to go? My rock's going to go out here, so it's going to be there. And just put a little bit of salt in. And then that needs to dry naturally first, and then you can use a hairdryer at the end, and then rub all your salt off. I probably put too much salt on there, it's gone a bit bonkers, but it's fine. And my sun's disappeared again. So let's just take a little bit more out. Try it again with a mount. Yeah, that's looking okay. Now I am going to draw the rocks. I couldn't decide whether I was going to do that or not. It'll probably be quite difficult for you to actually see this on the video because my pencil lines are really, really pale. But, you know, let's just get those drawn in, but don't make them dark. It's just really so that you have an indication of where they're going to be, but you don't want to see them when it's painted. So spend a bit of time, not going to do it too high. Think about where your mount's going to go. And then just slowly and carefully draw all your lines in for all your rocks. Now, obviously, there are more rocks on the image than I put on my planning sheet, for example. So I'm going to put a few more in, but not as many as there actually are. So you choose. I'm going to put this one in as well. But you choose how many of the smaller rocks you want in there. You need to get the main ones in, obviously. And then a few of the smaller ones. And you can rub bits out if you're careful. If you make a mistake. I want it a little bit higher, I think. Just going to try it again and make sure I've got all those in the right place. I think that's okay. And now we're going to paint the sea. Now this area of a splash here in between these rocks, I'm just going to wet with clear water. And you'll sort of see why. So that where the splash meets the sea is a soft edge, not a hard edge. So you're going down to your number 6 brush, really straight line, just like we did on our planning sheet. Between those rocks, doing little lines in the background. The little waves will be smaller, obviously further away, and get slightly bigger the further forward they come. Now can you see that bit at the bottom is sort of all diffused? Well, that's where it meets the splash. So rather than having a really hard line there, it's quite a soft edge, which creates the whole atmosphere of there being a splash or a wave. Now here I'm just going to think about the tops of sunlit waves rolling in as well. But that bottom edge is lovely and soft and diffused, which will help us with our big wave splash. Then you can start putting some darker bits in. Very difficult to explain sometimes when you just instinctively do things. But it's only like we did on the planning sheet. And I would say to my students now, I give you permission to fiddle. So with your little brush, you can put little waves in. And the sea tends to get darker towards the horizon, strangely. So you can darken that line up as well. Put little bits of blue in, whatever you feel. Now I'm just going to soften this rock at this edge. I should have wet the rock as well, really, for the same reason. I don't want a big definite line. So let's do this side here up to that rock. So yeah, this time I'm going to wet the actual rock as well, so that as the sea hits it, it'll be more of a diffused, softer area, which will be much easier to cover when we put the rocks in. And you see that it's quite diffused at the right hand side. Difficult to explain, but it just makes it easier when we actually put the rock on there if it's a softer edge. But don't worry if you don't do that. I'm sure you'll get a similar result. So take your time, keep looking at your picture. It doesn't have to be a carbon copy. You're getting an impression. It doesn't have to be absolutely the same. So I'm doing that sunlit wave again, you can see on the top. And then just adding bits of grey. If you're unsure about the colours, always use the paler colour first, and then you can add darker later. Some darker bits in to create like the shadow underneath those waves. Now I'm going to make it darker along the top again, and a few darker lines, because it needs to sort of match. Can you see the sea on the right is considerably darker? So it does need to have some coherence, so I need to darken little patches up, just in places. Just looking a little bit closer here. Okay, so we need to do the bit in between these main rocks really here now. So I'm going to wet the rock again, wet the rock itself, and I have put another little rock in there, which is horizontal, which you can see I'm just wetting now. I might put more in afterwards, but I thought I would actually just draw that one in, and then I'm going to wet this rock on the right hand side, and anywhere where I think the sea is going to splash. And then we need to start putting the sea in the middle. So I always try to split a painting up into bite-sized chunks. I do look at that and think, okay, well, I can do the sky first by doing this, that and the other, and then I can do that little patch between the rocks there, and I can do a little patch between the rocks there, and so on, so that you're not having to do it all at one go. I'm just going to do this side here because I've just had a little idea, because the sun is directly above that patch, that actually I might introduce a bit of the orange here, you see, along that top bit. I think that looks quite nice, to put a little bit of orange in the middle, as though the sun is just catching the sea in that area. And the same again, drop little dark bits in as you go along, because it's obviously got to be dropped into the sea when your paint is still wet. So don't do all of it and then go back and think, oh, these all look like little wiggly worms, because you're painting it on to dry. It's got to be painted on damp or wet for the small dark lines. Otherwise it will look a bit strange. So do little bits at a time. Okay, so I'm not rushing. Now here, once again, there's another wave which has got a sunlit top. So I'm working around that. And then add some darks with your little brush. And now I'm just softening this hard line. Can you see there's like a very hard edge at the top of those waves, but there's also a hard edge which I'm just trying to soften, and then we just put the mount round again, and you can see that really does look like a wave. Now we have this middle bit to do. I'm not going to do an awful lot more in this session. I know that there's a bit on the right as well, but I think we'll do that later. So we'll just do this middle bit, and I might do that little rock before we call it a day. So I'm just wetting the rocks, and I'm just wetting the whole of the patch actually, because it will just make it easier to get the paint on without it drying. So I'm leaving that rock out, that weird horizontal rock there. We'll paint that in a minute. So you're doing exactly the same thing. And put your darks in. And there's this bit underneath this main rock here. Keep it pale to start with, and then you can darken it up later. I'm sure we'll add more colour later, but this is a foundation colour, if you like. You could fiddle for England. Knowing when to stop. Add a bit of salt in places. Some will work, some won't. But don't worry about it. And then let's just paint this rock in here. So I'm using my black now. I'm painting on dry for this because it's a small enough area. When it comes to the big rocks, we will be painting on wet. And just fill that in. I'll make it slightly paler at the bottom, I think, with a bit of the brown, but just carry on with the black at the moment. You can always lift bits off if you think it's too heavy. Yes, I've put a bit of the brown in now. Not the peat, the brown, the lighter colour. Because there would be a little bit of shadow there in the water, like a reflection. Now another way to create splashes sometimes is just to drop blobs of water along the bottom as your paint is beginning to dry. And you see, I'll try and get a bit closer. So I'm just dropping clear water and it sort of spreads upwards, it creeps upwards and then creates this lovely sort of soft wave-like effect. You can get some real happy accidents by dropping water into watercolour. And then you can add more highlights, lift it off. That might be a bit too white actually, I might put a bit of colour back on that. Yeah, not sure I like that, but it's what it's all about. It's more forgiving than you think. Okay, so that's where I want you to get up to. I think that's enough for now. So happy painting. I hope it all made sense. It's very difficult to explain sometimes. But I'll see you in session 4, hopefully in 2 or 3 days.